joint approach to some of the security issues that we're facing in the Caribbean. So CBSI Connect was a way to promote law enforcement information sharing across the Caribbean region.
CBSI Connect allows each institution to act independently with its own independent portal site, but also replicate credentials to a shared site where collaboration and learning can take place among all participating institutions.
Through the Caribbean Basin Security Initiative, we've started several regional programs, whether that's justice sector training on ballistics investigations, or law enforcement investigations training. And through CBSI Connect, these trainings can be broadcast to all member states.
Academies, agencies have been using it. We have had an increase in enrollment of participants for courses.
The knowledge that has been gained in the field, the knowledge that has been gained in the region can be shared, and that sharing and that collaboration is what makes this a very special asset moving forward for Caribbean law enforcement.
CBSI Connect users can either view our trainings at the academies themselves that are installed conference centers, or they can even use it at their laptop, on their laptops at home. And I believe we now also have mobile capability, so it is truly a training system that's accessible anywhere.
We have regular meetings with heads of academies. We meet regularly with agencies in the region. We get their input into courses and programs that are being offered on CBSI Connect.
Trafficking in people, trafficking in drugs, trafficking in money transcends the participating institutions in the region and truly becomes regional problems. The sharing of information, shedding sunlight, sharing expertise is a very important tool in combating these issues.
We've seen several positive impacts from the availability of training on CBSI Connect. One of them, of course, is a travel cost savings, because you no longer have to spend a day traveling and buy an expensive flight to go receive a training at another academy.
The training that has been done on CBSI Connect for law enforcement officers has had tremendous response. We have had an increase in enrollment of participants on CBSI Connect. We have had academies putting more courses on CBSI Connect. We have had training every month on CBSI Connect.
We encourage the use of the system for both internal training and external training. And we are trying to build out the library of available courses stored on the system. And we encourage our member states to upload their individual training, which they want to share with the community.
If there are courses that are available that pique your interest, that could enhance your job, your ability to perform your duties as a professional over CBSI Connect, seek them out, participate, engage. This is really the value of what this technology brings to the region.
And that has allowed different academies to build much stronger ties with each other and cooperate on shared law enforcement challenges in the region.
The Honorable Dr. Ralph Gonsalves, Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines and incoming Chair of CARICOM, the Honorable Ms. Mia Amor Motley, Prime Minister of Barbados and Chair of the Regional Security System, Dr. the Right Honorable Keith Mitchell, Prime Minister and Minister of National Security of Grenada and Chair of the Council of Ministers with responsibility for security and law enforcement, Ambassador Owen LaRocque, Secretary General, Lieutenant Colonel Michael Jones, Acting Executive Director, CARICOM IMPACS, Mr. Earl Harris, Assistant Director, Strategic Services, CARICOM IMPACS. Good afternoon to everyone and welcome to our virtual session. I am Suzanne C. Prasad, Regional Training Advisor, CBSI Connect Learning Management System. It is a distinct honor to be in the company of esteemed leaders who, by virtue of their individual and collective visions of our region, have ensured that the Caribbean continues to shine on the international landscape. As a regional training advisor, I've witnessed the exponential growth of all the users of the CBSI Connect. These include police academies, law enforcement agencies, national security departments, and personnel involved in the criminal justice sector. There has been a remarkable increase in the number and types of programs that are offered on the platform, which range from techniques to prevent and detect criminal activity to the holistic well-being of our law enforcement officers. The virtual platform had virtually morphed into an educational space that can accommodate hundreds of participants who are always eager to learn from their counterparts in the region and abroad. The challenges of COVID-19 have made CBSI Connect the first go-to platform for facilitating events that require a wide outreach in the region. We are a region that prides itself on our ability to learn from experts and to share our knowledge and experience as we implement best practices, in this case, the fight against crime. I'm happy to announce that the transition has begun for CARICOM IMPACS to take leadership of CBSI Connect. This was always the intention that the platform would be solely owned and operated by a recognized Caribbean entity. We have been working with CARICOM IMPACS for the past 2 years, and the experience has shown that the region is ready to take CBSI Connect to the next level. It is an exciting time for all of us, and I thank Lieutenant Colonel Michael Jones and his team for their willingness to accept the responsibility of guardianship of the platform. CARICOM IMPACS, with its extensive networking capacity, has always become the leading facilitator of training programs using the virtual platform. It is my pleasure to invite Lieutenant Colonel Michael Jones to share his remarks with us this afternoon. I thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. And before I commence my introduction to this session, I crave the indulgence of the conference. Please allow me to express sincerest condolences to the government and people of Barbados, and especially to the family of former Prime Minister Professor Owen. May we have a moment of silence, please, to honor his memory. Thank you all. May he rest in peace and rise in glory. Today we welcome online for this session the Honorable Ralph Gonzalez, Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines and Chairman of CARICOM, the Honorable Mia Amor Motley, Prime Minister of Barbados, outgoing Chair of CARICOM and the Chair of the Regional Security System, Dr. the Right Honorable Keith Mitchell, Prime Minister of Grenada and Chairman of the Council of Ministers of National Security and Law Enforcement, and His Excellency Erwin LaRocque, Secretary General of the Caribbean Community. Unfortunately, Dr. the Honorable Keith Rowley, Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, and lead head for crime and security in the CARICOM Quasi-Cabinet, was unable to join us today. We've had two wonderful and informative sessions thus far. This morning, we started with the first session with some recommendation from our panelists for developing a roadmap for the future. Moments ago, we heard from our regional commissioners of police and how this pandemic has impacted not only their operations and planning, but the implications for their staff and families as well. Session 3, therefore, will be the capstone for today, as we've heard throughout the day about the importance of partnership and leadership. By way of background for our viewers, CARICOM leaders officially met in January 2020 and several other times since then to address the issue of COVID-19 and to develop a number of policies in place in anticipation of the arrival of COVID-19 into the region. The relatively low rates of infection in the Caribbean is testament to the preparation at the national and regional levels. The heads of government relied on scientific report from the Caribbean Public Health Agency and requested support where required from the agencies such as SEDIMA, CARICOM IMPACS, and RSS, to name a few. The pandemic put several national and regional systems to the test, including the areas of health, security, education, social support, and finance. The session will focus on the strategic preparation which was undertaken in anticipation of the virus arriving into the region, steps taken at the national and regional levels to address the crisis in a multidimensional manner, which allowed for countries to achieve their ultimate goal, protection citizens and residents alike. Issues such as security, healthcare, financing arrangements, restarting Caribbean economies, concessional financing, common procurement, reopening of borders, among other issues, will be addressed. Honorable Prime Ministers, Secretary General, Many thanks for agreeing to participate today, and we continue to thank you for your unwavering support. CARICOM Impacts received a number of queries on this session, and we understand that it is highly anticipated. Therefore, without further delay, I will now hand over to the moderator, Mr. Earl Harris, the Assistant Director of Strategic Services at CARICOM Impacts, to moderate the session. Mr. Harris, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Edie. I trust everyone is hearing me clearly. Honorable Prime Ministers, SG, I believe by now all protocols are observed, and the only unknown entity in this session right now is me. So allow me to introduce myself. I'm Earl Harris, the Assistant Director of Strategic Services at CARICOM Impacts, and I started my journey as a regional public servant 14 years ago. When I joined the agency, at the time when the region was preparing to host the Cricket World Cup, and I had the good fortune of meeting then DPM Motley, now PM, and she took us through the preparations. And I think coming out of that experience, I saw the capacity of the region to host an event that we were all proud of at the end. So forgive me for holding the region to a very high standard, because I know what can be achieved when we all work together. So I wish to now invite Prime Minister Gonzalez as Chair of CARICOM to start a conversation with me with respect to what are some of the challenges he foresees and what are some of his objectives that he wants to achieve when he most graciously accepted the chair from PM Motley, who I am sure had no reservations, handing it over against the background that the world is facing the COVID-19 pandemic. World economies are in a tailspin. Our tourism product is seriously affected. There's no one to look to for help because everyone is suffering from job losses, the closing of borders, economies, like I said, in a tailspin. What does the future hold for CARICOM, where you sit as the chair? How do we bring the region together to ensure that our voices are heard on the world stage? Prime Minister Gonzalez, Chair, I now invite you to start a conversation with us.
Thank you very much. I want, first of all, to join with the moderator earlier in paying tribute to the Right Honorable Owen Arthur, a titan of regional integration. I issued a statement this morning, and I've been advised it has been published across the region. So I don't intend to go over what I said, just simply to acknowledge at the very beginning his extraordinary contribution to regional integration. We will have more to say on Owen in the days ahead. I want to indicate to Mia, the Prime Minister of Barbados, that we are flying the flags on government buildings at half-mast today, tomorrow, and the day after tomorrow, the 3 days to coincide with your 3 days of mourning, which I heard announced in Barbados. So too at the building here, the Prime Minister's office, Ministry of Foreign Affairs building, the administrative complex. The CARICOM flag is also being flown at half-mast out of respect. And it's a real tribute to Owen, who was a very dear friend of mine, and I feel his passing very, very personal. There's Patrick Manning of our generation was gone to the great beyond. Owen, I think Keith Mitchell, my brother, you and I remaining. We make note of that. So I just want to acknowledge Keep,
Departure
well, you
lounge.
know,
Departure lounge.
huh?
We're in the departure lounge.
Yes, yes, yes. I believe I'm further ahead at the departures gate than you, but
I don't know.
but we never know. We never know. But the fact of the matter is, though, we are a generation moving out from the earthly city. I don't know. I want to acknowledge all my colleagues, everyone here. I don't know how long you want me to say something. 5 minutes, perhaps? Anything longer than that?
Prime Minister, the floor is yours.
Well,
And I say that reservedly because I was admonished by my Attorney General in Trinidad that two things you don't do is give a politician a microphone and an audience.
I see.
Limited to 5 to 7 minutes, it would be great. If
Yes.
not, it's
I
a
just,
competition.
the truth is this, whatever any of us says here today is really terrain which we have tilled over the last few weeks. And everyone knows essentially what we ought to be doing. And in fact, we are doing these things and we're coordinating. We just have to do them better as we go along. But from the outset, I conceived of this COVID challenge as a multidimensional one with 4 interrelated, interconnected elements. First, obviously, health. Secondly, the economic. Thirdly, social, which includes education. And fourthly, security. And you can't address one without the other. They're all intimately connected. And if I would just, for a moment, say what we have in the OECS, though that I'm speaking for CARICOM, I think it's important that I indicate in the OECS territories, because I have the data at hand. I don't have all the data at hand for all the CARICOM countries, but I think you'll see similar numbers. Well, we know that global economic activity is expected to contract by at least 5%. And growth in the advanced economies is projected at negative 8% in 2020 compared with nearly 2% last year. In the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union, the economy has been severely disrupted, as in fact in CARICOM. But in our neck of the woods, there will be a contraction between 10 to 20% in 2020 before starting to recover in 2021. I don't know what's MEA's numbers, but I suspect that they're probably in that kind of an order. Same thing in Jamaica and the like. And the key risks to be anticipated in the recovery include a delay in the global rebound, permanent job losses and business closures, natural disasters. We see them coming close upon us. With Gonzalo, we are lucky to escape Gonzalo. An increase in credit and liquidity risks in the financial sector. Now, we are going to have real problems with financial sector stability because the data all about showing that though the banking sector remains stable, the fact of the matter is that both for the banks and credit unions, they're experiencing a significant increase in default risk, market risk, and liquidity risk. And there are problems of fiscal and debt sustainability. So we have to, indeed, what we have to do, that we are contracting, all of us contracting additional debt to fund critical support for the economies during this difficult period. So the combination of economic contraction and the necessity for additional borrowing means a rise in the debt to GDP ratio in the short term. And it's uncertain what is going to happen to tourism in the new season. We don't know what is going to happen in respect of a vaccine. And there is a program, all of us have to put in place a program of action for recovery and resilience. Mayor Motley, during her chairmanship, laid the groundwork for our interface with international institutions, and we see that the World Bank and the IMF, to some measure, stepping up a little to the plate to ease some problems of financing, but still there are challenges. The CDB has done a little. The question as to whether they have done enough is an argument which we are having, a discussion which we are having. The impact on air travel and sea travel, it's a huge problem. And then, of course, the expenditure on dealing with COVID, all of what we know about, the question of more boots on the ground, the matter of testing, isolation, quarantining, the problems are phenomenal. Now, when COVID is active, it doesn't mean that the criminals are not, it doesn't mean the criminals are sleeping. In fact, as we see, there was an earlier dip in criminal activity in the early days of COVID, and we see an increase in criminal activity across the region as the economic pressures hit more and more. Almost all of us have put stimulus packages in place, one sort or another, for economic recovery, strengthening the social safety nets, and the like. But the truth is this: all of these things are really just a holding operation. The fact that we have done very well is a tribute in terms of containing COVID, is a tribute to the leaderships in the region, and very much so to the populations listening to the leaderships by and large. We have had some recalcitrance, but the recalcitrance has not been nearly as much as we see in what usually are called orderly developed societies, as we see in Europe. And this is something which we have to commend our people for. Our professionals have been very good. Now, at the regional level, we have had impacts playing a very important role. CDMA, the regional security system, CAFA, and the coordination done through the secretariat in Georgetown, the CARICOM secretariat, has been quite good, and also by the Director General. And in the midst of all of this, we are having problems with air transport with Liat. We are having the difficulties attendant on the climate change issues. Now, we have to accept that there may not be as good a moment for us to get some headway in the Bretton Woods institutions and with the developed countries to let them understand the nature of our vulnerabilities and to help to change some of the rules to favor, to balance it a little more for small states and particularly small island states. When this COVID, the first meeting we had for CARICOM, and I'll end on this, when COVID started, when the pandemic was declared, Prime Minister Keith Rowley of Trinidad and Tobago said something which still resonates in me. He said it with a touch of hyperbole, but nevertheless, very, very pointed, that the antidote, in fact, the perfect antidote to COVID-19 is CARICOM, the regional integration process. And in whatever we do, we just simply have to coordinate better and push our work through our regional institutions. And when we make the representations, the World Bank, the IMF, European Union, the governments in the United States, in Canada, in Britain, and the like, China, that we do so as CARICOM. Because if we don't, these multiple challenges will overwhelm each of these small island states. I think these what all that I've said, all of us know, is a question of important to say them again so that we know we are on the right track, all the political leaders on the same page, and the regional public servants know that is where we are, that is the direction in which we are going. There'll be this or that detail, but broadly, I think what I have sketched is a framework. Thank you very much. I think I went 7.5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. You're forgiven. But you did indicate that PM Motley set the groundwork when she was in the chair of CARICOM. PM Motley, would you care to expand on some of the challenges you faced while you were the chair and some of your big wins in pulling the region together?
Thank you very much, Earl, and it's a wonderful thing to see you again, and knowing that we worked as closely as we did, as you said, at the beginning of this long journey.
Yes, indeed.
I want to thank everyone who has extended condolences to the people and government of Barbados, and in particular to Owen Arthur's family. I know that they are all glad to hear the high regard in which all of you held them, especially, as Ralph said, as a regional titan. Let me put it in context. My relationship with Security and Cricket World Cup really came as a result of Owen Arthur's commitment and belief that we had to play our part to do everything that was necessary in order to ensure that the region remained a safe place while trying to host the third largest global sporting event. And to that extent, he willingly agreed that in spite of my no longer holding the post of Attorney General, that I should continue to have responsibility for the security framework for the region and to report to Prime Minister Patrick Manning, who, as Ralph said, is regrettably also not with us. So I'm conscious, Ralph, that the story has to be written and told, and Keith, and whatever we need to do to write the story, in particular on the CSME and how we got to 2006, because people take it for granted, I believe. Having said all of that, I come back to the matters at hand. And I think Prime Minister Gonzalez has done a marvelous job of contextualizing the 4 areas within which we have had in the region to treat to the COVID pandemic and the consequences of the pandemic. You will forgive me, therefore, if I do not seek today to repeat what he has said, bearing in mind that we're only supposed to be on for an hour. But I want to reinforce 1 or 2 points. One, the common approach to procurement, in the same way that we've had a common approach to testing as far as possible. The common approach to procurement has been buttressed not just only by what we've paid for, but also by what we're receiving as donations. And only yesterday, I was happy to receive on behalf of the region another significant set of donations from the WHO, which came as a result of the direct engagement that we had, SG, Laroque will remember, with the Director General of the WHO. We also received on Friday a sizable set of donations from the United Arab Emirates. And I'd like to thank our good friend, Minister Reem Al-Hashmi, who has looked out continuously for the region, and Abdullah, who has been liaising with us for her. I also want to reinforce that the African Medical Supplies Platform gives us, most importantly, and I think because we are not in the heat of the pandemic at the moment, we may have forgotten how the market failures affected this entire region in the early months of this year. But as we go into being able to access not just the PPEs and the thermometers and the thing which most of our people have, but as we go into the whole question of the therapeutics, particularly if there is a deeper and more virulent strain going into winter, we don't know, in the northern temperate climates, the ability for us to be able to both access as well as access at affordable prices therapeutics and vaccines becomes absolutely important. Dr. Jabre, who is the Director General of PAHO's representative in Barbados, Dr. Etienne's representative in Barbados, made it clear yesterday that they are working to be able to see how they can work with countries in the region, small states in the region, to ensure that persons are not left out of the vaccine. I say so conscious that the initial efforts of the global community to have a people's vaccine have not necessarily seemed to have materialized in a way that was anticipated or contemplated at the beginning of the year. And therefore, the inability of small states to demand and to determine access is of grave concern to us. And to that extent, I'm happy that we have merged with the African Medical Supplies Platform, which I'm not sure most member states have started to activate, but most member states will find it extremely useful as we move closer to the purchase of therapeutics as well as vaccines. The other key area, of course, is still in testing in terms of being able to access a reliable gold standard test that is available within a much shorter period of the 5-6 hours that currently takes for us to process persons, particularly those coming through our borders to visit. And to that extent, we are continuously looking for a credible, rapid PCR gold standard test that will allow us to better process persons through our airport and seaport. At the same time, we are in the midst of preparing new protocols for crews going forward, because we recognize that to the extent that we can have some limited cruising from this winter onwards, we need to be able to have strong and residual protocols, but it is going to require cooperation between those home ports and those transit ports that will be facilitating the cruise. And that is because effectively, unless we create a bubble, you cannot guarantee that persons disembarking from ships are moving into a safe environment to re-embark to go to the next country. And it therefore means that if we do want to have a safe and credible cruising environment, we are going to have to use CARFA and the CARICOM Secretariat and IMPACS as the basis, and to a lesser extent, SEDIMA, who does the logistical supplies for us and delivery. We're going to have to use them more than ever, which brings me to the second real point that I want to make. And I don't know how much longer we can continue to ignore this within the region. There has to be stability, and Prime Minister Gonzalez made this point on the 3rd of July when I handed over to him. We cannot, Prime Minister Mitchell, I know, is supportive in his own way. We cannot ignore the elephant in the room, which is the funding necessities for these regional entities that are going beyond the call of duty to make our lives easier at the national level. What Impacts does for us, there is no single Caribbean nation who can provide us and have the capacity to do the advanced passenger information system scrubbing, both against Interpol as well as against the United States government entities. These things are critical, not just for the lower end, but also the higher end problems that are known to the international community, but for which we ought still to be sensitive and vigilant to ensure that it is not imported into our states to create an additional problem beyond public health, beyond climate crisis, to security issues that go way beyond our ability to punch or to reach. I'm similarly making the same point with respect to CARFA. Were it not for CARFA's ability to be able to backstop and to do testing in the region in the last few months, many countries would have been left at the mercy of where the virus took root and where it was going without an ability to do effective contact tracing. And similarly with SEDIMA, whose role is even more critical now. Ralph, I wanted to tell you that the only person who could deal with Gonzalo was a man named Gonzalez, who made sure that he told him, don't come anywhere near this part of town. And we're glad that SALVE comes before SALVO, because the SALVE won for us. So we just hope that the next few names, Keith, can be put off by you and me. But
Gonzalo into the Caribbean Sea.
All jokes aside, the truth is that SEDIMA and the RSS in particular are both absolutely critical to the sub-region with respect to the deployment of these gifts. There are more gifts coming through the Jack Ma Foundation from the WHO. There are more gifts coming through other people. There is the stuff that we will buy. And then there's the reality that you have a storm going into the Leeward Islands on Thursday this week again. And it's looking as though it will go almost straight to the Leeward Islands, but we're going to keep watching it. But SEDIMA has to kick into shape. And we have to ask ourselves, do any of these entities have the budgetary resources necessary? And the SG, I know, will not want me to leave out the Secretariat, which also has been under severe stress. I think the moment in time has come for us to address the issue of automaticity of financing. And I hope that Prime Minister Gonzalez will be able to bring his great seniority in office as chair of a Caribbean community to allow us to finally confront this elephant in the room after decades of avoiding it. So I'm not sure that I need to say any more at this stage, Earl, but I do think that if we can, building on what Prime Minister Gonzalez said, deal with those two other matters that I've raised, I think that we would be in far better shape to continue to fight COVID, which is, given what the PAHO representative said, even with a vaccine, you're unlikely to see distribution for more than 1 in every 5 persons in the region in the initial few months, which means that we are going to be in this zone for a period of time. And to that extent, it means that if ever we needed to be able to reach out and to help refine aspects of the bubble to ensure that greater economic activity, whether through land-based tourism or cruise tourism, can come, then we need to do it now and to start where there is a coalition of the willing, quite frankly, and move on to those who want to come on rather than waiting for everybody to launch. That is my modest contribution for today. And I apologize if I am a little more muted than normal. Thank you.
We understand fully, Prime Minister. And it's interesting that you mentioned the creation of the bubble, because if I'm to use the Trinidad and Tobago experience where the borders are closed, but as we go into the summer period or the August vacation, we are hearing that all beach resort facilities are filled, all the beach houses, the private homes. Everybody is going to the beach to spend some time with their children. And I'm thinking that once this CARICOM bubble progresses and is established, it is an opportunity for us to promote regional travel. Prime Minister Mitchell spoke to the reduction of the taxes on airline tickets. And it brings me back to the conversation of 2013 when we were looking at the passenger fee, which could have been facilitated through the reduction in fares or the taxes, a portion allocated to a regional fund to fund the regional institutions. The time may be opportune now for us to relook that. But Prime Minister Mitchell, could you develop the point a bit more on what you were thinking, that the reduction in the passenger tax, how that would generate regional travel? And we could possibly combine that with packages with the hotels, because Prime Minister Motley often refers to the empty hotels and the impact that is having on the economy. I remember some years ago being on not a vacation, but a business trip to Grenada. And I went to Grand Anse on the off season, and there were about 5 people. But when you go at Easter time, it's filled to capacity.
So, you ready?
Yes, sir.
Chairman, and to my 2 colleagues, Prime Ministers and Secretary General, before I say anything on those specific issues, first of all, let me reflect on my relationship and, of course, my experiences with the former Prime Minister of Barbados, Owen Arthur. I got a call about 3:30 this morning because I think people are aware that I'm usually up at that time getting ready for my gym. So somebody caught me at 3:30 and informed me of the passing of my friend. It just to recall that Owen and I relationship go back since 1969 at UWI in Barbados. We were both on the UWI cricket team, which I was then captain of. So we developed a personal relationship. And I was then at the Department of Mathematics and he was in economics. So we had some interaction at that intellectual level because where the departments were constructed. And then when we left to go back home, we both entered politics not long after that. But before we did that, we all went to study to do graduate work. And strange enough, we came back to Barbados and Grenada almost around the same time and was in opposition politics. And then in late 94, Owen came here as leader of the Barbados Labour Party to be the key feature speaker at my convention. That was the last convention before I became Prime Minister in June, in 95. And he somehow, strangely enough, he was telling me at that point that I would get there, but he saw the convention. He said I would become Prime Minister before he became Prime Minister of Barbados. By the time he reached back to Barbados, the Prime Minister then decided he can't wait that Owen should become the Prime Minister before I did it in June 95. And then our history of political activities in government have traced over the years. The Prime Minister cricketing team in the region, everywhere we had CARICOM meeting, we had a cricket game. And so our relationship was a very close one. So I did issue condolences this morning publicly, and I assume Prime Minister Ralph, I didn't see your statement yet, but I assume you did so on behalf of the people of St. Vincent and CARICOM as a whole. But I did do so to the family of the former Prime Minister. So I just wanted to make a point on this. Before I go into the issue that you raised, and you're right, Prime Minister Ralph and Mayor did capture some of the major sentiments I think all of us would want to share. But there's one area I want to, before I go to the transport issue, the security issue and the criminal activities. We traditionally in my country have had very few murders, but it's strange since March, we are seeing 2 and 3 murders every month. which is a strange phenomenon for Grenada. And what is most significant, they're all little personal disputes. People temperature seem to be very high at this particular time in terms of tolerating each other. There were little differences of opinion, two friends having a drink in a shop and have an argument and a knifing each other. That sort of experience is cutlasses and knife, not a gun, but all serious concerns. And I assume that I heard Ralph mention the fact that initially there appeared to have been a reduction in criminal activities, but since then, well, we saw it maybe for the first 2 weeks, but after that, we are continuously seeing, and the churches and all the organizations are now meeting with us, the social partners, to look at that phenomenon that we are seeing. So I just want to mention this for what it's worth, because I think it's a crucial issue. I also want to mention the question of the health issue. One of the things I recognize is that we in the region need to work collectively on so many areas, but this issue of the pandemic has brought home the focus of insufficient trained personnel within our own countries to handle a pandemic as this or health issues of this nature. And talking about trained personnel in several areas, not just one area. We are lucky to have a friend in Cuba. Certainly Grenada, certainly lucky, and I don't understand how anyone could be talking of human trafficking with people coming from one country to another to help save lives. I don't know how you could translate that into human trafficking, but it's unfortunate the present situation that we're living in. So I want to mention the necessity for us to look more at the regional level for more training in those specific areas to deal with problems of this nature. And the issue specifically of the taxes and transport in general, I am a firm believer. As I told Prime Minister Motley some time ago, as a young boy, I remember BWI traveling from Grenada to Trinidad, like how I get a bus from St. George's to St. Patrick's. It's almost every 3 hours a BWI flight was leaving Grenada and vice versa. And I'm sure because of the large contingents of Grenadians in Trinidad and Grenadian descent, and similarly St. Vincent, Barbados, it seems the base population is there for a serious transport among our countries. But I believe that what has happened is that we costed ourselves out of the market. So there are other issues, of course, involving the lack of transport, enough transport in the region. But I believe that the whole question of taxes has been a factor. And I honestly believe that we have to address it. And maybe COVID-19 has brought it home in a stronger focus. So that for the first time, whereas before I wasn't getting any positive feedback from my colleagues on this issue, for the first time I'm realizing all of us seem to recognize the absolute importance of this. And the fact is we all have to do it, because if one does it and the other doesn't, one will just be losing revenue. So clearly we have to look at the airport charges, the whole question of the ticket taxes and so on. All these to me are a critical factor in the whole question of transport. And one of the things I recognize in the Grenada context, many of our small hotels, during the off season, the Caribbean man and woman that visits these countries usually go into the smaller hotels. They don't go into the more costly properties. So in effect, what will happen if we have more transporters? I believe it will, in fact, would act as a catalyst, the reduction in taxes. I believe that we will see much more activity for the smaller hotel properties in this country. And I know a lot of St. Vincent will clearly be a big beneficiary of this, and certainly Grenada. Barbados will always get a lot of the high-end activity and, of course, the larger properties, because historically they have been in the market probably longer than most of us. But I honestly believe we'll see a lot more. And we might get less, yes, we will get less tax on a ticket. But I believe the more people travel, I believe the volume is going to work in our favor. And I honestly believe. And then you're dealing with the question about VAT, because most of us, in Grenada case, we are not, our concentration of revenue is highly slanted on the whole question of VAT and indirect taxes. So because we don't have our income taxes is up above 40,000 and so on. So in other words, we will get a lot more revenue from the small hotels who have been very efficient in paying government their resources, their VAT revenues on the end of every month. And I believe that will spur up a lot of, and not only that, if we're talking about freedom of movement and single market and economy, and again, every time you talk single market and economy, you have to talk Owen Arthur. I would never be able to forget that. And it seems to me, we will give effect to these areas much more in a more serious way than just people hearing the words and they're not seeing enough of the end product of this freedom of movement and people traveling to each countries. So I honestly believe we will see a lot more volume of people interacting with each other. It will bring the Caribbean closer. And I certainly believe that we will end up better financially in every sense of the word. I generally believe that. So I hope, Chairperson, that we can see a stronger movement in this area. Hopefully with Trinidad opening up, I think that is, we clearly need to know when Trinidad is opening up, because the Trinidad market is extremely important for Grenadians, and I'm sure for the other islands. And therefore we anxiously waiting to hear what's happening with Trinidad as soon as possible as far as the opening is concerned. I also want to say that one of the major positive that comes out of COVID, because it said that every time we have disaster and challenges, we have opportunities. And I believe the technology has been a major positive thing for us, because we're trying to get all people in my own country, and probably the same thing in many of other countries, to accept the technology in a way forward to improve the efficiency of government and provide services more effectively to our population. So we are getting a lot of resistance, but it's amazing the amount of technological uses that are taking place within the government system. And the Parliament has done virtual, the Cabinet is holding virtual meetings. We are more in contact, except the physical thing, which some people clearly feel that is a negative. And I agree with that too. But I think we have benefited from that. And we've seen, even at the regional level, we are moving probably more aggressively in implementing more of the technological advances that can improve our economies regionally, and also as individual countries as a whole. I do want to endorse the comments of Prime Minister Motley and the regional bodies that we all agree to. I have, as chairman of Impacts, I have been amazed that how we treat impacts in this global environment where security is seen as such a critical issue, and it comes from every time every one of us speak, these words come out as critical importance. But I don't believe in the mix of things that we do, that we treat those regional organizations without impacts, without RSS, without CDMA, without CAFAC, we would have been in no man's land in Grenada during this crisis, and even before, with some of the activities. The RSS plane has been around. I don't know how they do it, to pick up tests for us and to take it to Trinidad and CAFAC to send back to us. I don't know how they do it, but anytime I get a call from Impacts, from the Brother Jones and his team about resources, I don't even wait to see if Grenada's owe any money, because I cannot believe, and I hope, colleagues, we can really put more emphasis, because this pandemic has certainly demonstrated the enormous importance of the security of the region. And I think we should certainly give a lot more importance to this regional organization, which has been so helpful to us as a country. So I will stop here, Chairman, and of course my colleagues at this particular time.
Thank you, PM Mitchell, for your kind sentiments. And I hope Prime Minister Gonzalez took note that you're in the gym at 3 a.m. Reference to you both being in the departure lounge. I know you tell him that he's on his own.
I want to take him there too. I will Zoom, I'll do a virtual with him.
I'm up at that time, but I'm working. Not going to the gym. I'm up at that time, but I'm working.
You're doing other things.
I'm working.
I'd certainly like to thank.
But I take your stricture.
I would certainly like to thank all the prime ministers for the kind sentiments they have shown and expressed about the CARICOM institutions. And I think this will be a good time now to bring in Ambassador Larocque to give us his perspective on how we have performed as CARICOM institutions, what were some of the challenges, what are some of the lessons learned, and what do we take going forward, what we require to go forward as we continue to battle this pandemic, bearing in mind that we have been navigating phase 1, but as CARFA would tell us, phase 2 is here, where we are seeing instances, especially in Trinidad and Tobago, of community spread. Ambassador Larocque.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. And let me, of course, start by greeting the Honorable Prime Ministers, our chairman, my immediate past chairman, and of course, Prime Minister Mitchell, who's also not only chairman of the IMPACS at this point in time, but also chairs the quoted ICT, and he made mention of it. So we have a very critical role there. I would wish to obviously start by recognizing and expressing my condolences to the people, to the Prime Minister Motley and to the family of Professor Owen Arthur. Much has been said about him. When I joined the Secretariat many years ago, he was Prime Minister, and I remember working along with him in terms of the launch of the CSME in 2006 in Jamaica. That stands out in my mind, and several other incidents. And I had a great fortune of meeting with him several times when he was here in March on another mission in Guyana, here on another mission. But we met, he took some time off to come to the Secretariat. And over one lunch, we must have spent about 2.5 hours talking about CARICOM and the CSME and integration and his engagement. So I too learned a lot from him, and I want to extend my condolences to all concerned. I think one of the things that you would notice from the discussions of the 3 prime ministers is the issue of the camaraderie that exists among not only the current prime ministers, but those who have gone, either left the public service or have gone beyond. And that camaraderie allows for greater, easier coordination and collaboration among them. As far as COVID is concerned, we started looking at COVID from January. And I very well remember the call I received from Dr. Douglas Slater, who's the Assistant Secretary General for Human and Social Development at the Secretariat, and who happens to be a trained public health medical practitioner. When he called me and he said to me, "You see this thing in China, and that just got into Italy, it's going to come our way." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "It's coming our way." And we began to monitor it from them. And it was, I think, around the same time, Prime Minister Motley also, we had a conversation about it and engaged CARFA. And the rest is history in the sense of the tremendous amount of coordination and collaboration among the agencies, all of whom have been mentioned, and including UE. In the terms of UE, helped us to do some modeling as well, in terms of where we were on the curve and what to expect and how to temper the curve. And CDB in terms of its own economic modeling. A lot of work was done on reaching out, fiscal diplomacy, by Prime Minister Motley, and we see the results of it. She's mentioned some resources that arrived over the past few days, and I got word this morning of some financial resources which may also be on the way very, very shortly for the member states, which is in direct response to that issue. The region, the institutions have done human service, and it's all been mentioned, and it is true that without them, we would not be where we are today. We've done fairly well. The member states have done fairly well in managing the risk that COVID presents. Yes, in the more recent times, 2 or 3 of our member states have experienced some surges, and they're seeking to manage them. Most of those were imported cases. But nonetheless, the protocols that were developed by CARICOM and submitted to the member states are being followed by and large. These protocols are what guides member states as they have the very difficult challenge of managing the risk. There are 2 risks at hand. One is, of course, the health risk, the immediate health risk, and the other is the collapse of the economy, a risk that you have to also avoid, a risk that you also have to manage. And how do you do this, especially when you take into account that COVID is in fact a new normal? And Prime Minister Motley has already mentioned we won't see a vaccine in our part of the world in any great measure, not until sometime next year. So we have to start planning for that as well. I know some member states are planning for that, and our outreach in terms of making sure we're not at the end of the line in getting these supplies when they're most critically needed for us to allow us to manage our health sector and our economies. We approach the COVID from every particular angle. Prime Minister Gonzalez mentioned the 4 main areas. And within those, just to recap some of the things that were done, our agriculture ministers met and our technicians and developed a food security plan within the context of COVID. Of course, our education ministers had to meet to see how you manage, and CXC, how you manage the COVID and how do you allow for the exams to take place. And on and on. Our trade ministers had to ensure that shipments, interregional shipping could continue and the like. So in every sector was mobilized in every aspect of every institution of our region that took part in this exercise in terms of managing the risk. The certain institutions were charged with particular responsibilities. CARICOM, besides doing the testing, and the RSS doing the transportation of the tests, we had CDEMA again, and all of this has been mentioned. CDEMA coming more recently to the fore with regards to the logistical transportation. I happened to have sat into a meeting last week with CDEMA on planning for the arrival of Gonzalo. And the challenge of managing COVID and the threat of a hurricane is real. And it showed the kind of skills that reside in our institutions, the logistical skills, the planning skills, in terms of how you do this. And we have to look at this a lot more closely, because to travel within the bubble, some of our member states rightly, and I say rightly, do require the PCR test. And Prime Minister Motley has mentioned the number of hours it takes to get a test. But if a hurricane strikes, you need to be able to respond. The first responders need to get in almost immediately to assist in the recovery efforts. And we have to look and see how we fine-tune that. I'm going forward. We see the threat that is looming. Again, Pierre Motley mentioned it, within 3 or 4 days to the Leeward Islands. And we have to see how we can mobilize and to mobilize a region. And it's not just CDEMA, because RSS, Impacts, CARICOM are all engaged in any disaster that emerges, and COVID is being treated as a disaster. So these what I can see coming out of this, it has shown that when we act together, as we have been doing now for quite some time, but in the time of crisis, it helps us to be able to manage it a lot better. And I do know, forgive me, but I will mention it as well, that when a head of an institution has to call me to say, in the heart of this of the COVID crisis, as he did, to say that he doesn't know how he's going to pay salaries that month. It is not an easy thing to worry about managing a crisis for 15 member states and associate member states. But at the same time, when the month end comes, Mike doesn't know how he's going to pay salaries, and he's not the only one. There are many others who would call me, and we try to see how we could work this out. And support for these institutions are critical for them to continue delivering I think one of you said, I'm not sure if it's you, Earl or Mike, they hold the region to the very high standard when we work together. Yes, we work together well. Yes, our institutions facilitate that working together, but they have to be able to be sustained to allow that to happen. Pierre Mitchell mentioned ICT. The ICT is a critical factor going forward, not only in allowing us to work together, we're doing so many things in terms of our integration. It also points to some weaknesses as we got together when Prime Minister Mitchell chaired the last meeting, and we received reports from the Caribbean Telecommunications Union and others in terms of the gaps in our regional ICT infrastructure and superstructure. It tells us that there's some work that we have to do to integrate and to come up with a single ICT space, and we need to move a little faster in that area, so that for the future pandemics, for the future crises that may come, we can readily rely on it. And there's much to be done in the education sector to allow for that service to be delivered in times like this and in times of crisis. So I think, Mr. Moderator, I've touched on many of the issues. Going forward, we have to continue pressing what I refer to as the fiscal diplomacy. We have to keep on pressing the international organizations that there's need for recognizing the vulnerabilities of our countries, of small island developing states and low-lying coastal states such as the mainland territories of CARICOM, that we cannot wait for a disaster to allow access to concessional financing, that has to be upfront, given the level of vulnerabilities we face and now the levels of risk that we face. I know that some of our countries have successfully negotiated disaster clauses in their sovereign debt, and treating pandemics as a disaster. We also have to ensure that we can get those going. So it's not only in the regional front, but we have to also continue working on the international arena. And the positive responses that we began to get from PM Motley's letters, we have to pursue that. I'm going forward. The interregional travel, whenever people ask me about integration, and I say to them, one of the biggest issues, one of the biggest hurdles that we've had, and we continue to have, is interregional travel. And you really cannot integrate people without access to reliable and not too costly air transportation. And we have the multilateral air services agreement in place that will allow for freeing up and allowing for smaller startup airlines to fill the void that may be created. And we have to pursue this. So a lot of these instruments are there. We've worked tirelessly on a lot of those regional instruments. And I'd like to see that they're put in place by our member states. We worked very closely with IMPACS. Lieutenant Colonel Mike Jones will recall on the 3 or 4 protocols, and that predates now, and we can see how they continue to serve us in terms of without the legal infrastructure that would allow us to work together in times of crisis. We recognize that there's a gap to be filled, and I hope that all our member states can implement some of those things going forward. So, Mr. Moderator, Mr. Harris, I think I've touched on several issues, and I'm very mindful of the time of today's session. Thank you.
We owe you a debt of gratitude. I know when I was preparing for this session, I had many a sleepless night and early mornings. So I could just imagine what keeps you up at night when your burden is much heavier than mine, and by extension, the Prime Minister's present and not present with us today. But I have 2 questions from the floor. We are streaming on YouTube and Facebook. And Prime Minister Gonzalez, I know time is tight with you. Prime Minister Motley, would you just delay your departure to facilitate 2 questions?
Yes. Sorry.
Okay. The first question, the bubble isn't completely closed due to weak border surveillance in some countries, in particular Trinidad, which also compromises other CARICOM countries. How is this being explored by CARICOM?
Let me go then.
No, I was just going to say, Ralph, that the truth is that I think unfair in Trinidad by singling out Trinidad, because in fairness, Trinidad probably has been the most resolute of all of us with respect to the official borders. And therefore, you're probably talking about the the informality of persons coming through in ways that they're not supposed to. I think
Correct.
of equal importance, however, and that has obviously to be strengthened. And I believe all of our countries have access to limited radar in the Southern Caribbean. And that obviously is something that we would need to be able to have enhanced surveillance. But before we get there, we also have the real issue of ensuring, and SG, I know, and Prime Minister Gonzalez and Prime Minister Mitchell would appreciate this, that we all have to have equally the same approach to testing and the same protocols to testing if we're going to share the same risk. And I think that while we are getting close to it, we're not yet there. And that's one of the remaining pieces of work, hopefully, that the Secretariat can, along with CARFA, bring us closer to being able to achieve.
We are hoping to implement our bubble from the 1st of August. The Trinidad is in this bubble, so to all the countries in the Eastern Caribbean are in the bubble. Because, look, this is about managing the risk in the most efficacious ways. You can't have a life without risk. The question is, how do we keep these risks to the minimum and to live well with COVID? Because remember, we started the discussion by saying that there are 4 interconnected dimensions: health, economic, social, and security, and they're all interwoven. Now, you're going to have, you take the number of persons whom we have hired to do contact tracing, and the information has to be shared between a number of different people. You will have problems when information is shared here or there. They have to be shared with immigration. They have to be shared with the police. And sometimes you may not have the best information network. But it doesn't mean that you don't have a good one. Things are going to go awry in the nature of life, living, and production. And day by day, you're tightening it, you're making it better, making it more perfect. So that in Trinidad, and I'm not going to get involved with Trinidad and Tobago for the simple reason, I don't want to get involved in the particular country, as Mia says. But there's an election going on, and people are trying to make all sorts of issues. But the fact of the matter is this: Trinidad and Tobago has handled the COVID situation quite well. And as the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and Grenadines, I have no difficulty having Trinidad and Tobago inside of the bubble. Look, you're going to have the odd person who's going to come out from Trinidad. Look, Grenada is doing very well with their controlling, but you had 2 or 3 persons leaving Grenada and testing positive in Trinidad. That doesn't mean that Grenada has a weak system. But you do have these things, and the question is, how do we manage them? How do we check them? How do we trace them? And that is the important question. Otherwise, if you don't have any risk, it means you lock down the place completely. And then what's going to happen? The crime that Keith talk about, you're going to have more of it. People killing one another more over trivial things. So all these things have to be in a balance, and we have to use our practical common sense in living well with COVID. And when what Mia says is important in relation to the testing. We, for instance, in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, we have our own testing now, but we do verifications of a certain number of them with CARFA. I even said to them, well, you shouldn't just do it CARFA because you may overload them. You can do some with Barbados, work out with the entity in Barbados, and so on and so forth. Because all of these things become important day by day. But I have, when the way the bubble is going to work, somebody comes up from Trinidad, they're not going to be requiring a PCR test. A fella in Lavantil is like a man in my home village in Connery. What do we do when he comes in? We do a temperature check. We look at them as they come in. We have nurses there to see whether they have any symptoms, because we have to encourage the regional travel. We have to treat. We have to treat Keith. The Grenadians down in Point 14 as if they in Soteas, because you're running a good ship. Keith Rowley is running a good ship, and there are risks, but we manage them. And this is how I think we have to approach this, and we manage those risks by having a basic set of protocols, which we try our best to follow. And this is how bubbles work. Look, right now, all of us, St. Vincent is that mistaken left off St. Vincent. They're going to include them tomorrow. When the United Kingdom is satisfied that all the countries in the Eastern Caribbean, including Trinidad and Tobago, that if you come here and you go back, you don't have to quarantine to the United Kingdom. So if the United Kingdom could do that, why can't I do that if a man comes from St. George's, or if a man comes, Keith, from Kingston or Sion Hill? And that's how we have to, but we all have to make sure we have this a more or less common set of protocols, and we do verifications with one another, and our professionals work with one another. And once we do that, I think we're going to be all right.
Chairman?
Yes, Prime Minister Bajang, you have the floor.
Chairman, I really want to comment on a point raised by Prime Minister Gonzalez there, because it tells you something how important this issue of testing is. We have to have some uniformity in our approach to this testing issue, because I'm sure we're reading and we're seeing the scientists themselves are still confused about the virus, how it operates and so on. And we don't know all that we should know yet, because a lot of scientific work is being done. This issue of the so-called three positive tests of the people that were here from Trinidad, it clearly, I believe, when we open, we have to treat this thing very carefully. If someone comes from Barbados to Grenada and is tested positive, what we should do is handle it very carefully with information to the Barbados authority, because you never know if it is in fact so. What happened in the case of the 3 people in Trinidad, that tells you the seriousness of this issue. There were news all over the world about 3 persons left Grenada and came to Trinidad with 3 positive tests before we even got contact from our friends and our minister to call the Minister of Health in Trinidad to find out what is the score, to find out data. And then we had to do a lot of our work. So we did 158 PCR tests with contact people that the person's contact tracing. None of them were positive. The husbands, the wives, the spouses of those persons, the 3 persons themselves were tested negative. Later on, and by Monday, they tested people again. It was negative, and was negative 2 days again. So it was clear that the people did not have live virus in Grenada when they came from Trinidad. Most likely, they had been infected some time before. So there was no, but this news is all over the place. Even Prime Minister.
I want to say this.
We had a similar thing too.
So I'm just saying,
from UE here.
We need to be careful with information.
No, but if I may say this, Keith.
Because the information that came out from Trinidad didn't come from no office no prime minister or minister in Trinidad, a public official didn't clearly inform people, and the word spread all over the place. Before I think Prime Minister Rowley or whoever, Minister of Health even knew, because the Minister of Health did in fact indicate to some extent the problem.
There is another issue here, Keith. And I'm glad you raised the question of the verification of the testing.
Very important.
Now, but even if there were 3 persons who came with the virus, it's not the end of the world, because all you do, if you're informed properly, you will do the contact tracing and you will set your population anxieties at rest, because
that's right.
So that's 3 persons is no, we are going to have cases, and the population has to realize that we are going to have cases. The only way you're not going to have cases is if you do like Kim Jong-un, you by the Chinese border, a fella comes across, you shoot them and you kill them. That's the only way you ain't going to have any coming in. I mean, that is a different kind of a way of doing it. But I see me and the Secretary General laughing. The point is this: we have to educate our population to understand that there will be cases. Is how we manage those cases. And we have to have our professionals working together and transmitting the information, dealing with the things professionally. Now, the interesting thing, Grenada did this magnificent work of tracing 156 or 159 persons, testing all of them. That ain't make no news, you know.
No, not at all.
That ain't making no news, because the real truth in that story there, for me, the real thing in this story is that Grenada exercised its responsibility to contact trace 156 persons, maybe in a 48-hour period, tested them.
That's right.
And can then say to the population in Grenada, can say to the population in St. Vincent and Barbados, where share a bubble, well, listen, don't worry, man, we got this thing under control. And that is what is important to be transmitted.
What I also want to add to that, Ralph, I entirely agree with you. I think that we have to recognize that there will be risk, there will be cases. You can't have tourists coming in to these countries, to St. Lucia, to Antigua, and to Barbados, to St. Vincent, to Grenada, and not at some point have some level of exposure. And part of the difficulty is, and the population is asking, well, why 72 hours before they tested to do the test? And the truth is, it is 72 hours, but even the 72 hours is not being met by the people coming on the plane, because as Governor Cuomo said to me very directly, that they don't even have the national labs being able to get back test results to people in under 6-7 days. So I think that all of us need to be particularly wary of what protocols we have in place for high-risk countries, because those protocols for high-risk countries determine what kind of exposure we are likely to have within the bubble.
Absolutely correct.
Yeah,
absolutely
so I think we need to do that, and I think that the Secretariat and CARFA needs to have a more activist approach, because in fairness, governments are busy with their heads down, trying to keep things together. But
what we had to do, Mia, is to go beyond the 3 days and say 5 days.
Yeah.
Because epidemiology is okay with 5 days. Go beyond 5 days, you get a problem.
But what we had to do is still test them also within 7 days of them coming too. But go ahead.
We test them when they come. We test them within 5.
Mm-hmm. So I think those are the key things that we need to do. The other thing is that we will move in Barbados to reduce the travel taxes this week. We've had a lot going on, but we will move this week to reduce the travel taxes. And as you know, on the rest of the other airlines, we believe in having an open skies approach as far as possible. And as you said, Ralph, the market is going to determine the capacity and the ratio. I also will offer Barbados's lab to do more if it comes to that, but the cruise ship movement especially is going to depend on that common protocols, those common protocols in the bubble.
Yes.
Prime Minister Motley, I have a question from the floor that is directed to you in particular with respect. The question is, has there been any response to your innovative idea with regard to Barbados as a virtual office?
Yeah, we've been doing very well on it. And let me be clear in these matters. If people come here within the bubble, I have no doubt that they're going to want to go to St. George's in Grenada, or to go to the Grenadines, Ralph, or to Castries or whatever. Because why would I come to the Caribbean and not fully experience the Caribbean? So that we've understood this as something that will add value to everyone in the region. It starts officially from the 1st of August, but the forms are out there. We've been having persons coming from both sides of the Atlantic asking questions. And it's just a very simple thing. We're not going to ramp up to see the volume of short stay tourists in the course of the next 6 to 12 months. And therefore, what else do we need to replace that? Well, we need people to stay longer. We need people to work or to study or even to receive medical treatment, but to treat to us as a platform from which you can expand the aggregate demand of what services and goods are needed in the country in a way that tourism would have buttressed at least by another 20–30% in most of our countries what people purchase on a day-to-day basis.
And one final question to the panel. In respect of development post-COVID in the Eastern Caribbean, the level of VAT applied to goods produced by small manufacturers is prohibiting their enterprise. Should not VAT be removed or significantly reduced so as to encourage sub-regional trade development? What about maritime transportation as an important measure for development in the sub-region?
Well, often, I don't know if persons who ask about the VAT, they fully understand how the VAT works, you know. Because if you have the input VAT being repaid, you're okay. Remember, it's the consumer pays it, but the value added tax is on the value added, you know. So I think it's important that persons understand the nature of the VAT itself. That's the first thing. The second thing, if you have no taxes, or you reduce all the taxes, where are we going to get any money to do anything, to pay the civil servants, to buy medicine, to buy all these things? So we have to be very careful that we don't have a no-tax society. Because if you have a no-tax society, you're in danger of not having a common set of services for people, administrative services, police services, and the like. I don't know if you know this, but most manufacturing enterprises get duty-free concessions on their equipment and their raw materials. And they also get tax incentives for a 10–15-year period or longer, depending on their investment. So I think that is important to understand. The question of maritime transportation, absolutely critical. We have been trying to work with private sector people. It's not an easy thing. St. Vincent and the Grenadines is known for its regional shipping, but we do it between here and Grenada, here and Barbados, and here and Trinidad. Is really a lot of goods rather than ferry service. A fast ferry is very expensive to operate, and that's why we haven't had private sector investors coming into it. Everybody talks about it. And that's the reality.
I must tell you, Ralph, and COVID disturbed part of this. We had met at the end of January, mid-January, with serious investors from elsewhere in the world who were very much interested. Obviously, COVID has put everything on pause with respect to maritime transport. But I do note that the IFC have asked for a meeting as well. And they were in the meeting that we held in the sub-region in Barbados around January, February as well. So we're not giving up on it, but
No, I agree with that. I know of that too.
Yeah, we are conscious that at this particular point in time, where cash is king, nobody's looking to go into major new investments where they need the cash to be able to get through this very difficult period economically. But I anticipate, quite frankly, that it will be one of the key priorities that we will have to deal with regionally going forward.
Can I be excused?
Brief comment, colleagues, on the VAT issue. I agree, Ralph. Clearly, I believe there's a lack of understanding even among our own population as to what really VAT is value added. And in the case of Grenada, probably even more so than St. Vincent and Barbados, that we depend almost entirely for revenue on VAT. Because as we said, we have very little income tax. So the revenue we get to run government, and which has given us the surpluses that we have based on how we have managed our country fiscally, come from VAT. If we destroy that VAT base by any initiative, then we'll be in serious trouble financially. So I'm not sure that's the best way. And as Ralph pointed out, most of the activities of the manufacturing sector, concessions are given for 100% on almost everything. So the thing that affects our manufacturing sector, the truth is electricity costs, is the utility costs. That is the major hindrance in the manufacturing sector. And if we could get some cheaper oil, cheaper energy, be able to take advantage of the possible oil resources in our ports, then I think we would be able to compete and help our manufacturing in a much more serious way than we can. Removing that will not do any much help for the sector in Grenada.
Do I have your permission to leave the chair? Moderator?
It looks like we have ended.
Okay.
Yeah.
We have ended, right?
You're on mute, Earl.
We've passed our time. Moderator?
Hello, no, yes, we are at time, but I want to give you all the opportunity to give any closing remarks.
If I normally end these sessions with a statement from the Book of Lamentations. I always affirm that I'm not a Lamentations man. And I quote from Lamentations because the Book of Lamentations is not really so much about lamentation, but how to live the Jewish people who are in captivity, in Babylonian captivity. And it says, morning by morning, new mercies we see. All that we need, thy hand has provided. Great is thy faithfulness. So we have an optimism in going forward, always. If you don't have that, my brother Earl, we ain't going anyway.
Prime Minister, I thank you. I don't think there's any better note that we could end on. I'm sure
May I just say one thing, Mr. Moderator? I think since the region is listening, do not underestimate the tremendous amount of work that our respective member states, our leaders, our institutions have done in the period thus far to allow for the numbers to be so low. I think sometimes we take that for granted, but you put your television on and you see what's happening in other parts of the world with significantly more resources than we do. And you wonder, how is that possible in those quote unquote developed countries, but we are able to manage we're able to manage this risk. And I ask the Caribbean public to recognize that in the leadership that is there within our community and our institutions. And you can expect more of that to happen as we continue to learn to live with COVID and to manage the risk, both the health risk, the economic risk, as I said, and other risks that will come with it. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Prime Ministers. We really appreciate the time you have spent with us.
Thank you very much.